Using our 19mm socket, let's go ahead and remove our lug nuts. Let's go ahead and remove our wheel and set it aside. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect our sway bar end link. We're going to use an 18mm wrench on the bolt side, 18mm socket on this side. Now our bolt is stuck inside here through our sway bar. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and thread the nut back on. I'm going to use my air hammer with a punch tip on it and just trying to drive that bolt through. Just going to go ahead and remove our nut and our washer here. I'm just going to use a punch and my hammer and get to the bolt head on the other side and just tap this and work that bolt out. So our bolt is stuck in the metal sleeve here, and the punch with the hammer wasn't really working that well. I just switched over to a flat chisel tip here, and I'm going to go on the other side, and I'm just going to hit the head of the bolt and drive that bolt out. Let's go ahead and grab our brake system here and straighten this out. Using an 18mm socket, loosen and remove the shock nut and washer. And use a pry bar and just work our shock off. I'm just going to thread our nut and washer on here for now. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to put our screw jack underneath the knuckle here. And what we're going to do is raise it up just enough to hold tension on here, and that's it. We're not going to raise the vehicle. We want to go ahead and remove this bolt here, which works as a pin, and it goes up inside. Inside the base of the coil spring is a large nut. This is 1 1/8 inches, and on the bottom side is 1 1/8 inch bolt head. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a wrench in the top. And then we're going to put our impact on the bottom. I'm going to try and loosen this nut. So we ended up having to heat up the nut due to the amount of rust content we had here. And we're slowly just trying to loosen this nut here. So we're going to continue to loosen this nut and take that right off. Before we handle that, we'll let it cool down. Let's go ahead and remove the nut. Get that out of there. And then we have our retainer cup here. Go ahead and work that up and out. I'm going to go ahead and lower our screw jack here. And this is going to allow us some more travel on it because our shock is not connected, nor is our sway bar end link. So we have some room to go ahead and now pull our jack out. With the jack out, we can go ahead and pull down on this. I'm going to go ahead and get our coil spring removed. Using a pry bar, let's go ahead and get this in here. We're going to go ahead and work this spring out. Flex our suspension down. Pop that spring out and set that aside. I'm going to go ahead and remove our bushing here. I'm going to go ahead and put our wrench on here. I'm going to go ahead and try and loosen this nut. So we had to heat up our nut here once again due to the rust issues we got going on. Let's go ahead and get that nut loose. Okay. And go ahead and loosen and get this nut at least up to the top of this here. And then we'll probably use some more rust penetrant on the bolt itself. Just gonna go ahead and remove that nut, set that aside. Once we get the nut off, let's go ahead and get our washer off here. Let's go ahead and you can place your jack on the inboard part of the beam. So behind this part here, I'm gonna go ahead and set the jack right here, and I'm gonna raise it just a little bit. That's it. Let's go ahead and remove our big bolt. I'm gonna go ahead and use our 1 1/8" wrench here. I wanna go ahead and loosen this nut here. And I'm going to go ahead and remove it. You got to remove your washer and your bushing. Let's go ahead and lower our screw jack. Once that's released, we're going to use a pry bar. I'm going to go between that and the arm, and we're just going to try and work this loose. Then you're going to go ahead and manipulate this linkage in the beam here so we can go ahead and get this whole unit out. Go ahead and remove your bushing and washer there. We're going to clean this up, make sure that this isn't all damaged or scored up. I'm going to take your large washer, slip that on so that the concave side is facing outward. Slide this on like so, so that the cone is inward. Then we install this into the chassis of the vehicle. It's going to be this cup here, facing like that. And you're going to have your red bushing here. Insert that. And then the washer is going to go there. And then your nut is going to go on the end of it here. So let's go ahead and get our arm installed. I'm going to go ahead and install the radius arm onto the main axle here. Once that's in, I'm going to go ahead and push on the axle and install the tail section of the radius arm into the chassis. Now we're going to go ahead and use our screw jack, and we're going to raise up the suspension. This is going to help us get the radius arm lined up with the bolt holes. We're going to go ahead and use our dead blow hammer to go ahead and work the radius arm, push that over and get the holes lined up for our bolt to go through. We can go ahead and use our dead blow hammer to go ahead and push that bolt up through the radius arm and the axle. We can go ahead and use a pry bar to manipulate the radius arm back and forth here to get the hole to line up for our bolt. Now we can go ahead and install the washer and the nut on the top. I'm going to take our cup here, and it is going to go in like that. And take our bushing here, and that fits inside the cup. Go ahead and put our washer on, and we're going to go ahead and get that nut caught a few threads. Let's go ahead and tighten this down. Now we're going to continue to tighten this down roughly till there's about 2 or 3 threads of the threads here, or the arm poking out of the end of the nut. We're also going to watch for the diameter of our bushings, make sure that those have expanded out just enough so it meets the diameter of the washer. And that's pretty much it. We are bottomed out, which is perfect. We have a couple threads protruding out, and our bushing is the diameter of our washer. So we're all set here. Now we're going to torque the through bolt through the axle to the radius arm. That's going to go to 200 foot-pounds. Now if you have the ability to do so, you want to get and torque this down to 90 foot-pounds. Then we're going to go ahead and take our spring isolator, set that over the stud like so. At this point here, it's going to go ahead and lower our screw jack. I'm going to remove this from under the vehicle, set that aside. I'm going to install a large pry bar right through here into one of the cross member right here. That's going to allow us to get some leverage to go ahead and flex the suspension. With that set in place, I want to go ahead and take your coil spring. You want to pay attention to the top pigtail part of this here, and there's a notch up in the top part of the spring tray up here for that pigtail to fit into. So I want to make sure we install this here. We have that lined up into that position. What we're going to do is set our bottom coil in. We also want to pay attention to the bottom section of this bushing. That's going to allow for the pigtail on the bottom here to line up on. So we're going to kind of set that in place. Kind of get a general idea where that's going to go. Press down on that pry bar, work that spring in. Now the spring should be somewhat loose. Shouldn't be super, super tight at this point. Go ahead and manipulate this spring up into place. We got our pigtail lined up here, which is perfect. With that in place, I'm going to go ahead and install our cup here. Take our nut. We're going to put a little bit of anti-seize compound on that thread right there. And go ahead and get that nut put in there and get that started. Now we went ahead and brought our jack back here. What we're going to do is we're going to raise up the suspension, get that coil spring seated. I'm going to compress this up just to the point where we see the vehicle start to move. You see that cup fall into place on the top. And that spring is lining up absolutely perfect. At this point here, we can go ahead and put our wrench in there. We're going to go ahead and tighten this down. I'm going to go ahead and snug this down. Once that's tight, we can now go ahead and lower our suspension down. Now we're going to lower this down just to the point where our shock hole lines up with the stud. Go ahead and pull the shock over. And go ahead and get that tapped into place. Install our shock nut. Once that's on there, a few threads, we can go ahead and lower this down the rest of the way. And go ahead and remove your jack. Now, if you have the ability to do so, you want to get and torque this retainer nut down to 70 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and snug this nut down. Let's go ahead and torque down our shock nut to 40 foot-pounds. It's going to install our end link here. Let's go ahead and put our washer on. Get that nut on. Let's go ahead and snug that down. Go ahead and torque this down to 30 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and install our wheel. Once we get that on, I'm going to go ahead and install our lug nuts. Going to get all these started by hand, and then we're going to go ahead and snug them down. Let's go ahead and torque our lug nuts down to 100 foot-pounds.